Hello and welcome to 60 Minutes or Less, a podcast from Birthday Cake for Breakfast. I'm Andy Hughes, and for episode 51, it's an honour to feature an interview with queer icon Roddy Bottum. A founding member of the notorious Faith No More, Roddy Bottum went on to form Imperial Teen, Cricket, and Man on Man, the latter with his boyfriend Joey. He can also now call himself an author, having just released his riveting new warts and all memoir, The Royal We. We caught up with Roddy over Zoom in November 2025, the month of release for the Royal We, touching on everything from his enduring friendship with Courtney Love to the testosterone-charged Faith No More tour with Metallica and Guns N' Roses. We also spoke about making it big in stocks and shares, drug addiction, and being one of the only artists early doors to come out as gay in the music industry. If you like the episode, let us know. Follow us on your favourite streaming platform and follow Birthday Cake for Breakfast on all the socials. Right, onto Roddy Bottum. Enjoy. How do we find you, slash, where do we find you? How are you getting on?
I'm getting along very well. I just got home yesterday afternoon from a really I have been gone from home for like almost 2 months. It was a crazy 2 months. I was in Provincetown where I am now. I live in New York City, but I went to New York and I moved my apartment. We're moving. That was a huge deal. That was almost 2 months ago. We moved everything from one apartment to the new apartment. And then I had practices and did a show with my band Crickets. And then Joey, my boyfriend, came down from Provincetown. We celebrated his birthday. And then I went all the way to Los Angeles, which is far from New York. And I finished tracking a record with my band Imperial Teen. And then I flew from Los Angeles to Paris, France for the very first book event of my book that I wrote. It was in Paris as part of Art Basel, which is a big art festival there. And my friend was doing like a book series in a gallery there. And she asked me if I wanted to be part. And I was like, yeah, hell yeah. Because I kind of finished the book there last year and it made sense. And then I stayed in Paris for a while, and then I went to London and I did an event at Rough Trade, and then another event at a small bookstore called Donlan Books. And then I went down to Brixton and did an event down there at Resident Music, which is a really cool place. And I love Brixton because it's so gay. And then Joey, my boyfriend, met me back in Paris. I took the train back to Paris, and then we hung out for a couple weeks. It's such a long journey. And then we came back to America, and then I started my American book events. I did one in New York with Paul Swallow, Christine. Then I did the next one in Los Angeles with a comedian named Margaret Cho at Skylight Books. And then I went to San Luis Obispo and did one in a really small, like kind of like used clothing store that was really cute. And then I ended in San Francisco. I did one final book event there with Brontez Purnell, a really great writer who's a friend of mine. And all of my friends from when I was a kid were there. It was really fun. It was at City Lights, a really reputable, fun bookstore. And then from there, like the next day after dinner with my sister, Joey went back to Provincetown and I flew to Miami and went to a book fair there. And I did the book reading thing and spoke and signed books and then left immediately after and went to the ocean, which is in Miami, and I went swimming. And then I had a Cuban dinner. And I slept and got up at 4 in the morning and took a plane and then a bus to here, Provincetown. And now I'm home.
I've got a
Victory.
list of I've got a list of questions, but just from that little monologue alone, I feel like I've got about 100 more. And
Yeah.
and now we're derobing as well. Yeah, that seems like a lot. Do you find that you're cataloging now that you've had to go back and relive everything for the book? Do you find that you're going, right, I must make a mental note of this so I can I can recall everything?
Yeah, that's a really good point. Good question. Yeah. I hadn't really thought about things in these terms before I started like getting things down for the book. And there was a real sense of like getting it all down. I think as I get older, sort of also just like checking things off a list, like knowing what I have to do is really important. And I need to have it all in my head. And it felt really satisfying, like just giving you that list of what I'd done, because like I am at a point in my life, you're absolutely right, where I'm like chronicling things. And I didn't used to be that way.
I always find it funny because with your new book, it doesn't feel like a typical memoir. And there are moments in the book where you even say, like, I should probably check if this is true, full stop. I've just checked, it's true, or something similar. And I always find it strange when you're reading a book that's like a celebrity memoir or whatever, and there's all these quotes in there, like they say, and then this person said this to me, and it's a list of, like all, and I think how, especially when people are off their nut on drugs or what have you, how can you remember like something that someone said 25 years ago? So it must be strange coming at it, from that sort of approach. Did you ever find that you were writing that sort of book, or did it come out as it did?
Well, I knew I didn't want to have to rely on anybody in the telling of it. And I knew I really wanted to fight convention in terms of like the type of book that I was writing. I didn't want to write a biopic. I didn't want to write like a memoir. I didn't want to write an autobiography. I wanted to write like something that read more like a fable or a fairy tale and could kind of like just exist as itself, like just as a story. So, like the act of chronicling stuff is sort of weird in that way. Like I was getting stuff in my head together from point A, from where I started the book to the end of the book, but it was more to sort of mix in a sort of like literary way. I wasn't really so specifically interested in like literal things. Like quotes, I would never have put in my book. That's not where I was going with it. And even, someone asked the other day in Miami when I was down there, they said, "Hey, what about like, yeah, they were asking about this, and they were like asking about memory and what you remember and how important it was to you." And I was like, not that important. They asked, "Do you journal?" I was like, "No, I never did journal. I mean, I did journal, but I lost all my journals. I don't have anything to sort of like fact check on." And my answer was like, "Yeah, it's not important to me to like even be literal or even honestly to be truthful." I would say like most of my stuff in my book is truthful, but a lot of it I made up. Like there's just a passage in like the end part that's kind of funny when I'm talking about Imperial Teen, which was a great sort of like, we did what we wanted to do as a band, but in thinking back on it, we didn't get what we deserved in terms of like we were kind of pioneers in the sense of like no one had really like sung about gay sex in songs or like gay ethos in lyrics. And it was something that was new and fresh and original and so groundbreaking in my head. We didn't really get recognized for that. And the band was not a big success. But I think in the book, I say, and then we went on to receive awards from the Gays Are We People of America, and they made a statue of us actually in so and so. And we got a Grammy for the record, which is all I just made up.
I think everything that follows that part is so not to, shit on your life, but so depressing, that like mid part of the book that when I read all that stuff about winning the awards, I was like, oh, that's so good that came of it. So you got me,
And
Roddy.
you assumed that was true.
I just took all that because you were so, it reads so truthful for the rest of it that I should have seen the provocation coming from the history of that
That's what
with
I mean.
your.
You're not alone. Like even like my publisher was like, I looked this up. I'm not finding a Grammy nomination for Seasick for Imperial Teen. Are you sure you're getting that right? I was like, oh yeah, no, I made it up. And they would be like, too, like sometimes like, hey, I don't know what this word means, and I can't find it in the dictionary. I was like, oh yeah, I made it up. I mean, why not? There's no rules. And sort of my premise in writing the book anyway was like kind of about I didn't want to stick to any structure and I didn't want to follow any rules. So it kind of makes sense that I would just like lie.
And it kind of fits in with the button pushing nature of your childhood and then, when you were involved in music and such, and now clearly even today. And you were kind of like, it feels like you were drawn to chaos in the book, and mingling with people that other people would try and avoid and stuff like that. Is that something that still follows you today and something that you still caught, or are you kind of pushing chaos out the way whilst you're moving house and things of that nature?
I think I encourage chaos, particularly in a sort of person to person way. Like I'm always drawn to people who have a little something more to say than the ordinary, like John and Jane or whatever. And I'm good at sort of sniffing that out. And I'm good at figuring like, seeing eccentricities and kind of like encouraging that and engaging with that. I've always kind of been that kind of person. It's funny though, it comes up like, I mean, it comes up in the book. I talk about it like that some of you listeners haven't read the book. So I'll just tell you like I had a boyfriend for so many years, like 10 years. His name was Jim, and he was absolutely crazy, just like an insane person. He was so smart, though. He had so many tidbits of information and so many, like, he was like an encyclopedia. And he was really argumentative, and people couldn't stand him. Like, we would go places and people would just, like, oh my God, roll their eyes and, like, just like couldn't wait to be out of his company. And he died eventually. Like we ended up on drugs and he died eventually. And I talked to my friend Matthew later and I was like, where did Jim die actually? Do you know anything about his death? And he's like, well, he was like schizophrenic and he was manic depressive. So he was dealing with that. And he told me that. And I was like, oh, yeah, that's right. Like back then, we didn't really have a vocabulary for like the sickness that people were dealing with. So to me, he was just like this eccentric, really fun person, and sort of like what I'm drawn to is that. But at the same time, it's like now I kind of recognize like after the fact and like as I'm getting older, like a lot of like what I've been drawn to are like, there's a lot of mental illness out there. And that's what sort of was in my life. So I don't want to like glamorize like an illness, so to speak, but for whatever reason, yeah, something left of center in a personality definitely is attractive to me.
Do you think maybe I would say that you definitely don't glamorize it in the book, but do you think maybe that's like, as you say, mental illness, possibly like some form of compassion, just that you want to be compassionate and you possibly haven't been able to put a name on it yourself, but it's that compassion that you've had for other people that has maybe been the reason.
That's a really good point, Andy. Thank you for saying that. That paints me in a pretty good light. Like,
Yeah,
oh,
yeah, it's
I'm just
good.
being compassionate. I'm certainly not being a looky-loo. Like when I get involved with people who are going through struggles or difficulties or whatever, there's eccentricities, I'm in like 100%. I'm on board. So I'm not like, like watching from the sidelines sort of. And I feel like, yeah, I do feel, yeah, there is a sense of compassion for sure. I know like I help people if I can.
It's, there's a glaring person in the book as well who deals in this sort of chaotic, world that you've these people that you've accrued and been drawn to. And there's press quotes that came along with the book, and it's a real power trio with, Kim Gordon and Chloe Savini and Courtney Love, who's, builds up a big part of the book. How do you think she is painted in the book? Because she seems very true to your friendship, but also at the same time, there's definitely that chaotic energy that comes across, like that thing you say about the watches that you and your sisters had been given. And she put it on, and within like an hour, she broke it forever or something like that. So, it's the question that I was more gearing towards of like Kim and Chloe and Courtney after everything you've been through and the lives that they individually probably have, it must be so important to you to have these connections and these friendships still.
It is. I think like, yeah, I always consider myself a loyal person. I know I'm that. And I would have never written sort of Courtney is still like a friend of mine and just a super important person to me in my life. I would never paint her to be like less than who she is. Like the things that I talk about when I talk about Courtney, they're very specific and they're very true. There's no lies involved there. Like all of those stories I tell about Courtney are absolutely true. And I think I paint her in a really like good light, especially compared to sort of the way that I think the rest of the world engages with Courtney and talks about her. Like, I forget about it, but crazy things come up when like I will post something or someone posts something about me and links Courtney Love. Like, oh my God, the comments that happen are insane. Like, I mean, just the implication about Kurt's death that like Courtney would be involved or something. That's so hurtful and crazy and mean. Like, so to have that on one hand, like, that didn't color the way that I presented Courtney in my telling of her, but looking back at it, it's like, oh yeah, I think for her, like she read the book at a really early stage and she was like signed off. She loved it. She thought it was fantastic work. She was really into sort of the process of it and just the act of it. But I think for her, I think it must be sort of even as wild as the stories get about her, they're still like absolutely flattering. They only like talk about like what a hero she is and how much fun she is and what a spirit she has. And that's the only way that I think I could talk about her. But it was so much fun to write about, like particularly about her because she is such a character.
It's funny just hearing you say that. You're absolutely spot on in that you don't color her in a bad light. You kind of just say this is what happens, but we were devoted to each other, and we always found each other through the tough and the more tough. I
I
mean,
mean,
yeah.
for sure, it was reciprocal. Like she took care of me, I took care of her. Yeah, for sure.
So I've just realized that I was probably hoodwinked as well about the whole Apple thing. Was that true as well? That you said your ex-partner Jim was really into his stocks and shares. Was that a fallacy as well? I can't recall if you
No,
remember.
no, no, no. I didn't mean to misrepresent what I wrote about in my book. Like there aren't really a lot of lies. I'm just like when that question came up to me in Miami and someone asked about credibility and truthfulness and memory, I was just like in my head, I was like, you know what? I have a more creative mind than I do a memorizing mind, if that makes sense. Like remembering things is not something that I'm amazing at, but I do have a really great imagination. So let's concentrate on that. I think that was what I was kind of leaning into. But I didn't mean to say that like my book is full of lies. It's not. And that one that you bring up, the one about Apple stock, is absolutely specifically true. And you guys who haven't read the book, it's a crazy story. But that man that I was talking about, who was my boyfriend for so long, Jim. He was like it's hard to imagine. It was such a crazy time that we lived in and such a crazy village. San Francisco was so weird and odd. And we were bicycle messengers and we were on drugs and we were shoplifting and we were just like hooligans, like to the umptest degree. We were such monsters. So it's hard to like put in context, but like us as kids, like imagine me, I had dreadlocks, smoking pot every day, a bicycle messenger, like just living on the edge and kind of like barely making it work. And I had this crazy boyfriend, and like I was saying, he's so smart. And he would always talk. He started teaching me about the stock market. I mean, in what world would that ever happen? Like, why would a kid like me, dreadlock, smoke pot, like punk rock? Why? That there's no room in that world for stock market. But it was so fucked up and so sort of controversial for us to sort of even pay attention to that I was just drawn to it. It was like so abrasive and weird and contrary that a punk rock kid smoking pot every day, would be into also in the stock market. So we started like leaning into that, like following the stock market just to fuck with people and just like talk about it out in the open in places like, oh yeah, did you hear that like Time Warner is being bought by like we would just talk about stocks. It was so ridiculous. But cut to sort of readers, listeners, you haven't read my book, but Andy's talking about like at one point this boyfriend said to me when the very first check I ever made with Faith No More, I got like $10,000, which was unheard of. The band had been like touring for I don't know, like literally a year and a half. It was so exhausting. And we were just doing it on the cheap. We got $10 a day. We worked our asses off and we started to get a little popular. And at the end of this tour for that long, it was at Christmas time and we each got a check for $10,000. We were kind of divvying up the money at the end of the tour. And it was unheard of. It was so much money. Like, oh my God. And basically, I was just going back to San Francisco. I was going to move back in with the boyfriend. We lived in a one-room apartment. He was a bicycle messenger. I didn't really need the money. And so he convinced me that insane boyfriend, Jim, he's like, just take that $10,000 and buy Apple stock with it. You won't regret it. And I was like, okay. So I did that. And this was like 1980 something. It was before, it was right when what's his name was gonna Steve Jobs
Steve
was gonna go
Jobs.
to Apple. And it was at its lowest that it had ever been. And like it was what years and years before the iPhone and stuff. So I did, and I just like, okay. So I took that money and I put it into Apple, and I still have that stock today. And for all you mathematicians out there, do the math. You could look it up and find out what I'm worth right now, but it will boggle your mind. But the takeaway is like those crazy people that I get involved with, those crazy minds that people criticize me for, or like other people would like shun my association with like crazy people. it pays off kind of. I mean, it's a weird way to sort of look at it, but like that particular instance of being associated with a, absolute outsider, nut made me a millionaire for starters. And then you have someone like Courtney Love. Like Courtney and I were friends when Courtney was like nothing. She was just like me. She was just living off the streets and she was like very just making it work. But I championed her and stood by her side like from there until like where she is now. And look, like I mean, Academy Award nominations later, it's like, oh, you got to look at the choices that I made growing up and the people that I chose to associate with, and like, oh, yeah, I guess you were onto something.
I can't remember whereabouts in the time frame it was, but you and your previous partner were, deep into the drug habit at points during your relationship. How much were you like looking at that 10 grand in the bank and thinking, this could score us a lot of what we're after at the minute? Or was it all just trust Jim and stick the money on Apple and future you cheering?
I don't know. That's a good question. I can't remember where I would have been living off of otherwise, but I think the spirit of the moment and the spirit of where I was at that point in my life was just like these grand gestures that didn't really make a lot of sense, and it's sort of I had that $10,000 just like throw it all on Apple, like and not really think about the future. And sort of it was about that. I think we were just kind of like making stuff work however we did in terms of like scoring drugs and keeping our habits going and even like paying rent and stuff. Like it was really cheap, our rent that we would pay. But yeah, I don't know. It's just one of those examples of like rash, crazy decisions that I make at that age. Like throw it all on Apple.
And you come out smelling of roses.
I mean, 25 years later, sure. Like in the course of it, it wasn't an easy go, and I probably could have used that money for something. But yeah, now I'm doing okay.
So, having come from in the book, you say it's like an entitled attitude that the youth had, and some youth possibly still have today. That, by the sounds of it, seems like pretty, you landed on your feet, but it could have gone the other way, but it came from an entitled place. Did it seem kind of normal from that entitled, again, entitled, as you put it, to then move into Faith No More and build that up to what it became? Did that kind of seem like just normal at the time for you to move into that? Because obviously you come from the beginnings of it, and then the next minute, you're on tour with Guns N' Roses and Metallica and such. So did it feel like here's how my youth has gone already? This just seems
Right.
normal.
I think sort of the transition of it and the amount of time that it took to get from point A, which is like forming the band, playing our first shows, like getting started, to the point where we're like in a bus, say. It was a lot of years. It wasn't like it wasn't the next moment. It took a long time. And by the time we sort of got to a place that was like almost comfortable, like maybe we were staying in hotel rooms or doing whatever we were doing, like at a point where like, oh, I didn't even set up my keyboard stand anymore. Like, I think so much time had passed and it took so much effort and so much work to get to that point that by the time we were there in the sort of accolades of like doing well and getting paid and staying in hotel rooms, it was like, yeah, this should have happened 5 years ago, honestly. It really took a long time to get to that point, and we worked so hard to get there that it absolutely felt earned and a given that we would be where we were at the end of it. I guess my long-winded point is that it was just a slow transition from riding around in the van and making $10 or less each of us a day to the point where we're staying in hotels and playing arenas with like a big rock band. It was a long time and it was a lot of work.
Did that transition, like you say, it was a lot of work and it took time, but I heard you on another podcast where you were saying once upon a time you were stopping in one hotel room, the six of you, bit of crew, bit of band, and then all of a sudden you're all in your own hotel rooms. And to even think of sleeping in the room with each other as you were before just didn't even come up. It wasn't that you didn't want to do it, it's just that you were so used to this lifestyle that you'd worked hard toward. Was it weird in that sense that, even if you only had a couple of hours, you'd want to be in this one room by yourself in the hotel rather than mucking with everyone else?
I guess so. Like touring is really hard though, you know? I mean, it's kind of like that's a privileged, entitled thing to say, like how amazing that we were able to even do that at all. But I think like once you get into it, like it's such a hardcore existence. It's really a lot of work. And I don't think it's like that's a demanding sort of want to have your own hotel room. But it certainly is something that most bands don't have, you know, like even like Joey and I, we do our band now, Man on Man, and we do okay, but like it's two of us in the family car with all our gear. We do it as absolutely cheap as we can, and we play every single night, and it's just exhausting. Like, I mean, you know the math of what you do. You get to the venue, you set up, you unload the car, you set up your gear, you do a sound check, you break down your gear, you move it off the stage so the other band can come on and do their thing. They do their thing, you move your stuff back onto the stage, you do the show, you sell the merch yourself, you break your stuff down, you load the car, you go find a hotel. Just the mechanics of what touring is really insane. I don't know how kids do it these days, and I don't know how they sort of make it work. I think when we were younger and we started, we would for sure we stayed on people's floors and stuff a lot, or people's couches. But that was a definitely way younger person thing. Like at this stage, and even at the stage that I was in Faith No More, where we started staying in hotels, we were older and we'd been at it for a while, and it didn't seem like a lot to ask to stay in a hotel. Looking back on it, though, it's like, wow. I mean, people don't generally succeed with bands. Like there isn't a lot of success rate.
And to be sleeping in hotels, singular rooms, even now for bands who are doing pretty well, seems crazy with the way, yeah, bands don't really make it, I
Yeah,
would
I mean,
say.
it's extravagant for sure. I mean,
But
for a while there, we would have like we had a, you know, we would tour in a bus. And all of the tours that we did after a certain point were in a bus, which is so crazy expensive. I don't know how much that costs. So much money. But like, and then we would have like our bunks, technically, where we could stay in overnight when we would get to a city. But then more often than not, I think we would want like a room on top of that. Super piggish, isn't it?
I suppose with the bed on the bus, you've got to have somewhere to put like your Fabergé eggs and expensive crisps and stuff like that.
Yeah. And there's like, you know, everything else. The massages and the sort of pedicures, manicures, and oftentimes psychics are visiting for like psychic sessions. It's a busy life. A
I
lot
was
going on.
interested,
You need a lot of space.
well, quite. I was interested. I mean, it makes total sense. We'll possibly get onto it in a minute, but that Guns N' Roses tour that happened with Metallica, was it right that Axl Rose's psychic often had the willies pre-show and that shows would just get cancelled if she didn't
Yeah.
fancy? Yeah, was
It
what was
happened a
that
couple
like?
times. So like, I mean, it's sort of admirable looking back on it, but Axl Rose had this like sort of we specified like it was him that had this psychic that would tour with them, and we saw her a couple times like go on stage, and she looked very sort of like soothsayer sort of woman in shrouds. In my head, that's how she looked anyway, with a turban. And like this might be one of those instances in which I'm making something up, but I don't mean to. In my memory, this is the way that it exists. In my memory, she's this woman. We're off side stage. We've done our sound check, but then someone comes onto the stage, this woman, and like wraps and a turban and like maybe a wooden cane and big jeweled like rings, and she's kind of just sniffing around and checking out the stage in a sort of prerequisite to the show. And then it turns out she had a bad feeling about the juju of that particular stage and that particular night. And she shares it with Axel and the camp of Guns N' Roses and says, no, this is not a good place for a show tonight. You need to cancel. And they would. They would cancel the show for, you know, it's an arena. I don't know how many thousands of kids. Metallica's on the bill too. It was huge, like the biggest rock and roll circus you'd ever seen in your life. That many people, and they're probably already in line. All those kids are in line. They have their tickets. They're getting ready for the show. And because of this sort of like forbearance that she had, the soothsayer had, it was like, nope, canceled.
I wonder what her per diems and hotel bedroom looked like. She must have been making serious change off that tour as well, I would
Yeah.
imagine.
I wonder what her resume looked like. Like, how was she hired? How did she fall into that job? who was she? Like she must have had some sort of credibility. Like Los Angeles is kind of made of people like that. There's a lot of sort of mysticky, sort of like spiritual types. So I'll bet definitely she came from California, but I don't know. Yeah, it's hard to think like what I mean, it's hard to imagine like what was the criterion in like hiring that person.
Unless it was like an almost famous type thing and she toured with Boston and then she toured and she was just like a psychic groupie or something like that. Who
He
knows?
had a history, maybe. I think that's what like a lot of those sort of like roles come down to. Yeah. But I like to think like she had to prove herself somehow. Like they're like, all right, what's in my left hand? She's like, a pebble. And they're like, oh my God, how did you know that? You're hired.
I was thinking you were going to say more like Scanners, where that guy's head explodes, something like that.
Yeah. Well, I don't really know. That's what I'm saying. I don't know the criteria, Andy, but it was probably strict in hiring that person. But then she had a lot of credibility because she would find something wrong with the stage for whatever reason. And in my estimation, she wasn't really like she wasn't challenged. They just like, okay, show canceled. We'll do it another day.
So the tour itself, I've heard that there was a lot of misogyny abound because they'd go into a city and the Guns N' Roses crew would, pick up these strippers and dancers and what have you. And then apparently they just put, I'm not a big Guns N' Roses guy, but apparently they just put out a tune that had homophobia and racism in it. So that must have been just such a war between camps because I believe Metallica was good with Faith No More, but it must have been such a strange dynamic going into that world where it is kind of your job every day and having that sort of atmosphere.
I think it was a challenge, but honestly, only for me. I think it was very much the rock and roll norm at that point. Misogyny, male aggression, toxic masculinity was all just part of the equation in that time. And everyone was on board for it. I don't know anyone that wasn't, honestly. I mean, like our guitar player at the time, we had a very rock guitar player. He played a flying V guitar and he had like long black curly hair and he was very rocker sort of vibe, which is what we loved about him. Like he played guitar like that, like chunka, 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 kind of like Metallica played. And he was like best buddies with Metallica. He was very much of that type of person, but the rest of us were all sort of like leftist leaning, progressive, weird artists, liberal minded. Like Billy, who I grew up with, who played bass for Faith No More, and Mike, the drummer, and Mike, the singer, we were all like, oh my God, like kind of blown away by like the audacity of that environment. We couldn't believe what we were seeing, but we were very much alone in that mindset. Everyone on that tour, the Guns N' Roses people, their crew, the Metallica people, their crew, Jim, our guitar player, probably a lot of our crew, they were down with the hedonism. They were okay with it. And it was just an era in which people got on board. Me being like the gay man who sort of like, I grew up with three sisters, basically. That was just like offensive and wild and what the fuck to me, more than anyone else, for sure. And in the book, all you listeners out there, this is a spoiler, but like it reaches a point in my life where recognizing that and seeing like the potential association of us as a band and me in that band being sort of like regarded as that was like no, 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 no. So up to that point, I hadn't really been open about my sexuality in the press. So it kind of did stir me on to making that declaration in the press and like talking about being gay. And that's sort of when my story turns in the book.
With that tour and distancing yourself from what was happening, prior to that, you had some Guns N' Roses members appear on stage with you, and it was kind of like an unexpected thing. It was something that management had kind of cooked up. As you were getting more, known and such, I imagine that was more the case where management were making their influences more well known. How was it having that sort of slipperiness, particularly as it went on, where you joined the tour and you experienced all this stuff with the Guns N' Roses crew, etc. How was it to have that sort of management slipperiness behind the scenes where stuff like that was happening?
It didn't feel like slipperiness. Like I'm assuming you mean slipperiness in sort of like a negative context, which I get
Sure.
it if you're saying that. But it was really more than anything, it felt like a favor. Like, oh my God, like cut to like that time in the world, like even Guns N' Roses, when that first record came out, like I bought it. As pop songs, they were so good. It was so dynamic and like it worked so well. And even though like there was this thing like an insert that came in the first Guns N' Roses record, and it was kind of like a cartoon sort of drawing, and there's like graffitied wall. It's a cartoon, and there's like a girl in a like she's like an underage girl in like a schoolgirl outfit, you know? And she's like her underwear are down to her ankles. And the vibe is she's been raped. I'm just going to say that. And I'm sorry to trigger anyone with this sort of talk and how that might affect someone. Apologies. But that's what, and even like looking at that, when I bought the record and opened it, I was like, okay, still, I was like in. Like it's hard to think about like ourselves in those terms back then and how much more lenient like sort of I was and my sort of like I was okay with things. Like that's not cool. Like, especially today, if we were to look at that, like see that as a sort of an addendum in someone's artwork to like include something like that, you would just be like, what the fuck? No. But like for whatever reason, we as a people, we embraced Guns N' Roses. Even like progressive and liberal people embraced Guns N' Roses. Like it was a viable thing. And they were exciting and dynamic and they were a loud, disrespectful rock band and it was cool. So, I mean, it's a long-winded way to sort of explain like sort of where we were in terms of like, so we're on stage at the Roxy in Los Angeles and our manager says, "Hey, we arranged, it turns out Duff and Slash are really big fans of you guys, and they want to join you for War Pigs on stage. They brought their guitars." And we're like, oh, hell yeah, exciting. So it didn't feel like it was a slippery sort of like thing, but I mean, it was more like how connected they were. Like we were just kind of like lived in San Francisco, and that sort of notion of like a big Hollywood rock star coming on stage was kind of felt like, whoa, we've hit the big time. It sort of felt like, whoa, exciting and stuff. Like we were not at all like judgy about it. We were like, oh my God, that's so cool. And I think I talk about in the book too, like Courtney was there and we were like, I remember like being backstage and like, oh my God, we were both like so excited, like, oh my God, how about that encore? We kept saying. Because Duff and Slash came on stage and it was like, wow, that was just like so cool. So at that point, like it took a long time for the sort of the distaste of what they were to sort of settle in. Like it took a long time for me to like, oh wait, hold on.
I think a lot of artwork was not too dissimilar, wasn't it, around the time? Like all those Scorpions records are really not on, like I don't know if you've seen those covers, but like some
I don't know,
Google
Scorpion, similar vibe though.
I think not as popular as Guns N' Roses. I don't know, but like Google those
Like I know the
artwork.
band, but I don't know any of their artwork. But is it the artwork was like a similar vibe?
Yeah, maybe not schoolgirl, but definitely I'm a
Right.
man, she's a woman, and something's going on, which is a very light way of putting it. You Google it afterwards, but was it also, kind of interesting because I don't know whether we'll get onto it in a minute, hopefully, but I don't know whether the article that you'd been interviewed for, where you pretty much came out, I don't know if that was out at this point or whether that came towards the end of your appearance on the tour. But was it kind of like as not openly gay, but near enough? Were you kind of like alone in that sense, like on the tour? I know the rest of your band except Jim was, with you in terms of being like, what the fuck? But was it kind of like you felt like alone in a way?
Yeah, there was definitely solitude in sort of my perspective and who I was, like being the gay person. And for sure, like in that camp, in that world, in that rock and roll circus, there were no gay people. No way. Like I was the only one for certain. And in that way, certainly so much alone. And I didn't do that interview until like kind of like the end of that tour when sort of something comes up in that circus that I see and I'm like, oh my God. And it's kind of like the turning point for me. But like not only was I alone in my gayness at that point, but also I was doing heroin. And so that in and of itself is such a private, secret, solitary thing as well. So not only was I like hiding my gay self, but I was also like, I was hiding my drug habit too. And that was a really lonely place to be. So just in general, like, where I was in my life at that time, it was really intense and lonely.
Quick break in the interview just to give you a heads up about some of our previous episodes. From our first episode to our latest, we featured interviews with the likes of Proto Martyr, The Lovely Eggs, Anna Erhard, Chat Pile, The Future Heads, Public Service Broadcasting, Gang of Four, Joshua Idehen, The Jesus Lizard, and even snooker legend Steve Davis. Treat yourself and go back through the episodes. Be sure to tell all your friends and comrades too. Enjoy! It comes up quite a bit, this sense of shame, not just for you personally, but just as someone at the time who was gay and not being out, like people you would meet and people within the scene and such. And it seemed like there was such a level of shame around identity. And by the sound of it, that goes kind of hand in hand with heroin addiction as well. How was it looking back on this period, having to relive everything for the book because there's some real harrowing stuff in there.
Yeah, it's funny. Like people ask that a lot, and I keep talking about it because it's come up in ways that really surprised me. Like writing about it was kind of like a similar thing. Like I was just kind of alone. Like when I started writing my book, I was just alone and pretty much behind closed doors. It was COVID, and it was sort of like, I mean, that added to just sort of the solitude of like being alone and working on something. And there was certainly no judgment. Like I didn't feel like I felt like I could say anything I wanted. And I wasn't even really sure that it was a book at the time. I was just sort of like really kind of like journaling and just writing down all these crazy stories that have happened in my life. I didn't even know, where it was going to go, but I felt really free to just sort of be as honest and sort of as outrageous as I wanted to be because what did I have to lose? I was by myself, and who's going to read this anyway? And then cut to like I kind of thought about it as like all right, like and these people wanted to put it out as a book. Like I mean, I worked for it. I sent it out to people. I tried to get an agent. It was sort of like I decided, okay, I want this to become a book, and I finessed it into like what it became. I worked really hard to make it what it was, but it didn't really dawn on me for a long time, like the nature of what was happening, which was like I'm sharing these really, really intense things about myself. The writing of it, it didn't seem that intense, and I wasn't that sort of moved by it. But now, when I'm like, I'm just finishing this crazy like press thing of like talking about the book and like talking to you about it, talking to like all the people that I've talked to in the past couple months as it's coming out right now, it's really, really intense. And it is, you're right. It's exactly that. It's like reliving these things, that like I haven't kind of really thought about. I mean, I wrote about it, but I didn't really think about it. And now also knowing the repercussions of like putting it out there in the world, what people think of me, and like, there's so many people in my world and in my life and who kind of like, oh my God, all these secrets they're like reading about from my perspective. And it's really intense, and it's become very emotionally intense. It just has happened as a wallop, and it came really in an unexpected way. I wasn't prepared to deal with it in this way, but like I mean, a lot of times like in Miami the other day, like that was just on Sunday, I was like, yeah. I mean, I was telling the people who were listening, not a lot of people, it was just like 30 people in a room, but I was telling them exactly this and just like how fragile I'd become just having to like, do this day after day, like talk about these things because they're so intense, And I was telling these people in Miami, I just like, oh my God, I'm gonna cry. I'm gonna cry. That's what happens a lot. But it didn't happen in the making of the book. It didn't happen when I was writing it. But now that I'm dealing with it and talking about it, it is happening really intensely.
It's almost like you are having these, because you talk about briefly therapy in the book, it's almost like you're having these therapy sessions with people in
Yeah.
different cities, different countries. But on the flip side of that, when the article was written with Lance Loud for Advocate, even though you had people in your ear discouraging you for doing the article before it came out, you then had so many fans and so many people within the scene and within the industry who took it as such an embrace, if that makes sense. And, they were able to confide in you. Has it kind of been the same now when you've been able to share such personal stories with people on the road?
I think so. I think we're in a different era now, and people listen to it to what I have to say and listen to sort of my trials and like where I've gone and like my stories. I think people listen with a much more open heart than they would have like back then. I think people are open to struggle, and I think like I don't know, we've just been through so much as a world. Just COVID really spun us. And it made us kind of like fragile, and it also made us kind of like, in my estimation, it makes us like way more open-hearted and sort of giving in terms of like giving people space and hearing people's stories and giving compassion in regards of like what people have been through. And I think people get something out of that too. So I feel that a lot. I feel like sharing things and like a lot of conversations I'll have with people after feel like, the time when I came out of the closet back when and we were first touring and like gay kids would come up to me after shows and hug me, and be so grateful and thankful like for my struggle. It feels like a connection in that kind of way. Albeit it's kind of one-sided, I'm just sharing about myself, but it feels really good to sort of like break the ice in terms of making people even a little more compassionate than they would be, sort of.
It's really kind of sad in a way. There's a few things in the book, like where you say you didn't realize rather what a privilege it was to be gay until so much later. So it must be so powerful to have that sort of connection, albeit like you say, kind of one-sided because it's your life.
Like you asking how that makes me feel or how does that sit with me?
And more just a comment, really,
Yeah.
just that.
It
So
is. It's like I've said it before, it's kind of like one of the most sort of like heroic things that I think I've been able to pull off. It was a really special thing. Like I'm able to sort of like, yeah, what a gift. Like that I could do that. Yeah, I talked to someone the other day, like a Jake, that Scissor Sisters band. He has a podcast, and I was talking to him the other day, and he was talking about like he was like, how much of it honestly was just like kind of the drama, like your sort of declaration of being gay and sort of like throwing that into the mix. He was like challenging me, and he was like, how much of that is just like really just like you were getting off on the drama of it, which is kind of true. Like it was dramatic, and it was really like impactful in that way, just in terms of like, whoa. But the takeaway, yeah, is just like, oh my God, like, the connection that I was able to make with the whole like sort of world of like gay kids was just phenomenal. Like that's the one thing I've been able to pull off as an artist that really is so profound. That's so cool to make that connection, that connection. If that's the only thing that I was able to pull off in my life, that's amazing. That's so great.
I was thinking earlier because I did listen to that podcast with Jake Shears, and I was thinking, mad to follow him, but also mad to have, as far as I'm aware, the only interviewee on who's died at some point and also been held at gunpoint, which is pretty gnarly to look back on, I'm sure. But one thing I was interested in, you touched upon it before about feeling kind of isolated. It seems crazy to me that your coming out in the industry was such a first in a sense. There were other artists for sure, but with the big dogs, like you'd think that Elton was open, but he was married to a woman. And it's crazy as well to think that Rob Halford, you were kind of one of the inspiring factors for him coming out as well.
Right.
All that all that sort of stuff must just seem crazy to look back upon a life, such a pioneer.
Yeah, it's crazy on a couple levels. Like on one, that like that those people were still in the closet. Like particularly Elton John, who was so flamboyant. Like
Yeah.
he wasn't open about his being gay. And Freddie Mercury, like, come on. Like it's such a crazy thing to look back on. Like that man, the way that he looked, the way that he sang, the present that he was giving in his world, and he wasn't gay. I'm like, that's insane. Rob Halford, I can kind of excuse a little bit just because like his sort of present was like really flamboyant, but it was in the context of that sort of like hard rock. So I think his sort of like declaration was more of a surprise. for people to deal with. And it was sort of like, whoa, really? Like, I don't know. I never really followed that band. I don't know that band. I didn't know
No,
him ever.
same, yeah.
I didn't listen, but like all of my friends were like, I mean, my gay friends who were like metal fans or whatever, my friends are like, oh yeah, we always knew that. But how would you know that? Like, I guess he did, like, he had sort of a Leatherman sort of vibe that he was like pushing. But like, yeah, I mean, that's surprise, that's shocking to think back on. And then even like going into like, later day stuff, like Michael Stipe, I think, why wouldn't he be comfortable like talking about his queerness? Or Bob Mould, why wouldn't they be comfortable talking about their queerness? It's so after the fact and after like hardcore like rock stuff, you know? It seems like it was a safe place in which people could talk. But it was like this, I mean, there's no arguing like what people's damage is going into that. Like I know Michael and I know Bob, but I don't know what their sort of like their damage was as kids or where they're coming from or how comfortable they felt or like the repercussions of that in their lives. I'm not one to discuss, but like it's odd that it took that long for the world to sort of get on board with people being gay, I guess, is the takeaway.
You've said that times are so different to when you were on that tour and to now, and how, things are so open. Obviously, there's still lots of work to be done, but do you think there is maybe like a call for artists to, that they must come out and like people don't take into account the damage that might have, or the trauma that they might have had as kids, or is that something that you're not aware of?
You mean present day?
Yeah. And in the last however many years and such.
I think for sure. I think it all comes down to like, how people were brought up and people's sort of like perspective as young kids and what they're exposed to. I think honestly, like RuPaul's Drag Race changed everything. Like now, I don't think people have issues with like girly boys or flamboyant behavior and I think it's championed more than anything. I don't know if kids even deal with that anymore. I mean, that's kind of a naive stance because I will say that and then people will say like, well, you live in New York City or you live in, California. You have no idea what the kids in like, like small suburban towns are going through. And I think that's probably the case still. I'm not like subjected to it so much, but we all acknowledge like how far we've come along.
It's a bit of a difficult question. There's lots of nuance to it, isn't there? But I just thought that might have been interesting, given like you say about Michael Stipe and such, that who knows what's gone on in their
Oh, absolutely.
backgrounds.
Yeah, and I give room for that. Like I don't want to be like a finger pointer or like a whiner in that regard, but it's just like in a historical sense and talking about like the world as it's gone from point A to now, it's like, wow, just in a sociological sort of way, like what is it? Like absolutely. And I give room for like whoever wants to come out or deal with their sexuality and however they do it is cool. No issues there. I'm not like when we were younger, there was a sort of like there was a process outing people that was really intense, that was so aggressive, like it happened in San Francisco a lot, like, and they would like force people to like come out of the closet, which was, I mean, that was a lot to sort of put on somebody. I don't feel like in that way. I don't feel that strongly.
Yeah, it's a hideous thing to think about, isn't it? It kind of makes me think about how newspapers over here would like count down to when a child would become of age, a girl, and then, you know, hands rub together and say, "Come on, lads, she's 16 now," or whatever. It's kind of almost like a mob mentality, isn't it? It's horrible.
So gross.
So I don't want to keep you too long, Roddy, but I was interested about in your youth and seeing the likes of Buzzcocks and The Fall and stuff. Marky Smith was notorious for similar behavior. He was off his nut on speed most of the time. Did you ever have any, was it a bit too early for you in that sense of when you were going to shows, or did you have any run-ins with those sorts of people, or?
I never met Marky Smith. Like I saw The Fall a bunch of times. It's kind of a funny thing though to think about, like that to like talk about in terms of like the homophobia and the male aggression and the toxic energy of rock. It's funny to think about in terms of like, oh yeah, it probably existed in my very midst. In terms of like, okay, yeah, probably Buzzcocks, probably like The Fall. There were a lot of like bands that were like cool and sort of like progressive and modern and punk rock that were just as debaucherous, you know? that's sort of a funny realization. Like they weren't all innocent. In terms of sort of my story and the way that I tell it, it makes it a little bit more sort of a defining narrative to think that like my people, my crew, my, slew of modern bands were not that way. They were heroic and like more noble-minded, but I recognize that probably was not the case a lot. It's funny because like even bands like that, like The Fall or Buzzcocks or, everyone I think, like it or not, was aspiring to this like pillar of rockdom. And that pillar was like the flying V guitar and like groupies. I mean, just the notion of groupies, the fact that we all know what groupie means. Like that was, full on women that are willing to sort of give themselves to the cause of a band in that way. That was not specifically like hard rock. That was like all encompassing of like all of the music that we dealt with, all of the bands that we dealt with. Yeah, and very specific to a time. So those bands like Buzzcocks, The Fall, they weren't sort of like limited only to like their aesthetic of their music. They were also like part of the world in terms of bad behavior.
And rounding it out, there's a lot of chaos in the book and a lot of sadness and unfortunately, like deaths and such and addiction. But it feels like Imperial Teen was a real turning point and almost like a fresh start for you. And you can feel that come across in the book, albeit without the Grammy win or without the major award win, which totally got me. But it must have been, so gratifying to be able to do that. And I was interested, do you think it might have gone the other way if you just cracked on with Faith No More and hadn't branched out and done something else? Do you think you would have just plodded along in terms of a musical sense rather than working with your partner these days and working in Imperial Teen?
I mean, I think it was an option at the time, and it would have been the easiest route to take to like just continue and sort of ride the wave that was Faith No More. But like, I think I had the common sense to just sort of like out of preserving my own mental health, I kind of needed to like being a musician, doing what I did, like my voice. I just sort of had to acknowledge that. And I knew if I didn't acknowledge that, if I didn't sort of entertain these sort of thoughts and ideas of like having a voice, having a queer voice, like making sort of something out of my queer life and sharing that and doing it in a musical way. If I didn't do that, I think I would be a different person for sure than I am now. And I don't think I would be as happy as I am now. That point to me is very much turned out to be sort of like, and I only recognized it in the writing as I was finishing the book, like, oh, okay, yeah, this is how it all ends in a really nice way. Like that I'm able to sort of like come to my own and recognize that I have a voice that's gay and I can speak with words and sort of that artistic voice has merit. That's sort of the happy ending in the book, if you will.
And it's led to, all these book tours and so much embracing with friends and loved ones from all over. So it must be great.
Yeah, I mean, just writing the book was like phenomenal. Like, what a crazy thing to do. Like, who does that? It's it surprised me that I've done, and here I am sitting in it. But yeah, I'm happy with it.
Perfect. Well, thanks so much, Roddy. I mean, I feel like I could chat to you for hours on end, but appreciate you've got more of these to come, I'm sure. But yeah, good luck with the move. I can't
Thanks,
imagine
Andy.
I can't imagine what that's like as anyone above over the age of 30. So yeah, good luck with everything.
Thank you. Thanks so much for your questions. I really enjoyed our conversation. That was fun.